There are just 3 airlines that control over 50% of the US domestic market, and they've been around since the early 1900s.
United States airlines like American, Delta, and United have always chased the best. So when Boeing introduced the 777X, it seemed like the perfect match, an aircraft built for the future. But then, everything changed. Delays dragged on, technical issues piled up, and now, years later, not a single U.S. airline has the 777X in its fleet. But that doesn't mean they've been silent. In fact, all 3 airlines just made huge announcements regarding their plans for this plan.
Boeing's making steady progress towards certifying its 777X, with recent crosswind testing at Lubbock Airport, LBB, marking a big step forward.
What did they say? And what does it mean for the next era of American air travel? Stick around, because you'll want to hear this. Boeing 777X's technical innovations and issues despite incredible design features. When Boeing announced the 777X in 2013, it sounded like the beginning of a new era in long-distance flying. Airlines were excited, engineers were proud, and passengers were hopeful. Boeing had taken one of the world's most trusted wide-body jets, the 777, and promised to make it even better. The 777X was going to be the plane that would dominate long-haul flights for the next generation. It would be faster, cheaper to fly, better for the environment, and more comfortable for passengers. The plan was to have the plane flying by 2020, but fast forward to today, 2025, and the 777X still hasn't carried a single paying passenger, as its new target delivery date has been fixed for 2026. So what happened? Well, to understand that, we need to first take a look at Boeing's design approach for the 77X. Instead of building a new aircraft from scratch, Boeing decided to stick with what had worked before. They took the older 777, which was first released in 1995, and gave it a massive upgrade. They added all the best parts of their other new plane, the 787 Dreamliner. That meant using composite materials for strength and lightness, giving the aircraft larger carbon fiber wings, adding modern cockpit technology, and improving aerodynamics to reduce drag. From the outside, it sounded like a smart and cost-effective decision. Why build an entirely new plane when you can take something proven and make it even better? But this kind of half-new, half-old design, which is typically called a derivative aircraft, is a risky move. Boeing had done something similar with the 737 MAX, and that didn't go well either. In that case, trying to stretch an old airframe to fit new tech led to serious safety flaws. With the 777X, it wasn't safety issues at first, but rather an avalanche of engineering, production, and testing problems that began to pile up. Let's talk about the technical innovations first, because honestly, the 777X really is an impressive piece of engineering on paper. One of its most striking features is its foldable wingtips. The new wings are much longer than the ones on the previous 777, stretching to 235 feet to help improve fuel efficiency by making the plane glide through the air more smoothly. But a longer wingspan also means it wouldn't fit at most airport gates. So Boeing came up with an idea never seen on a commercial jet before. This idea was to make the wingtips fold upward while on the ground. When the plane is flying, the tips are extended. When it lands, they fold up. This brilliant compromise allowed the plane to have longer wings without needing airports to build new gates. Then there are the engines, being the mighty GE9X built by General Electric. These are the largest jet engines ever made, with a fan diameter wider than the fuselage of a Boeing 737. They were designed to be quieter, cleaner, and much more efficient than previous models. Each engine can produce over 100,000 pounds of thrust, but with lower fuel burn. Combined with the plane's sleeker wings, the 777X promised to use 20% less fuel per seat than the older 777-300ER. That's a huge deal for airlines, because fuel is one of their biggest costs. That's not all. The passenger cabin also got a big upgrade. The 777X would have wider cabins, better air pressure, higher humidity, and larger windows, which is similar to what travelers love about the Dreamliner. These features reduce jet lag and make flying feel less like a metal tube in the sky and more like a comfortable room. Airlines could even keep the same 10 seats per row setup, but still offer passengers more space. But building something this great isn't just about dreams, it's about execution. And that's where Boeing hit the wall. From the beginning, Boeing ran into problems. One big issue was its attempt to use automated robots to assemble parts of the 777X fuselage. The plan was to make the assembly faster and more precise, but it didn't work out. The robots kept failing, misaligning parts, and causing more trouble than they solved. Eventually, Boeing gave up on them and went back to manual assembly, which meant more delays. Then, there were delays at the new composite wing factory in Everett, Washington, where they were struggling to get the new production lines working at full speed. This added months, even years, to the timeline. And then came the engine problems. While the GE9X engines were groundbreaking, they weren't flawless. During testing, they faced performance shortfalls and even a high-profile failure where an engine was damaged in transit. That led to major testing delays. GE had to go back and fix several issues before the engines could be certified. And if the engine isn't ready, the plane can't fly. Things got even worse last year, in mid-2024, when Boeing was forced to pause flight testing after finding a structural issue with the part that mounts the engine to the aircraft. A loose or faulty engine mount is a huge safety risk, because if it fails mid-air, the engine could detach, something that actually happened in the tragic American Airlines Flight 191 crash back in 1979. Boeing found similar issues on 2 other test planes, which shook confidence in the project. As a result, they once again delayed the launch, this time pushing the first delivery to 2026. And all of this was happening while the company was also dealing with a machinist strike that slowed production even further. So, while the design was excellent and full of promise, the process of building the plane turned into a nightmare. It became more and more obvious that Boeing had taken on a project that looked great in theory, but wasn't quite working in reality, at least not yet. Customers were not happy. Emirates, which had ordered over 200 units of the 777X, openly criticized Boeing. They said the delays were costing them money and forcing them to rely on older aircraft longer than planned. Some other airlines canceled or deferred orders, but strangely enough, none of these orders came from 3 of the biggest U.S. airlines, namely American Airlines, Delta Airlines, and United Airlines. Keep watching to learn why. Lack of interest in the Boeing 777X from American Airlines, Delta Airlines, and United Airlines. The Boeing 777X project was meant to be a crown jewel in the company's line of long-haul aircraft. Big international carriers like Emirates, Lufthansa, and Qatar Airways quickly placed large orders as soon as it launched. But in the United States, something strange happened. None of the big 3 airlines, Delta, United, or American, rushed to place an order. In fact, as of 2025, not one of them has bought a single 777X. And that silence says a lot. To understand why, we have to talk about how American airlines work. Unlike carriers in the Middle East or Europe, U.S. airlines operate with something called a multi-hub strategy. That means instead of having one massive airport as their base, like Emirates has in Dubai or British Airways has in London, they spread their flights out across several cities. Delta, for example, uses Atlanta, Detroit, Minneapolis, and Salt Lake City as hubs. United has hubs in Chicago, Denver, Houston, and Newark. American is based in Dallas or Fort Worth, Charlotte, and Miami, among others. Because the United States is so large and spread out, no one airport dominates in the same way as Dubai or Frankfurt. This setup changes everything. When you don't have one big hub, it becomes harder to fill very large airplanes. The Boeing 777X can carry around 400 passengers in a typical three-class layout. That's a lot of seats to sell, especially on long international routes. In the US, even on popular coast-to-coast flights like New York to Los Angeles, airlines often prefer using smaller planes with more frequent departures. That's because American passengers like flexibility. Instead of waiting for one big flight each day, they want a choice of many flight times. A giant plane, like the 777X, doesn't fit easily into that model. Another problem is seasonality. Travel demand in the US rises and falls with the seasons. During summer and holiday periods, more people fly. But in off-peak months like January or September, even large airlines struggle to fill big planes. If you have a 400-seat aircraft but only 280 people show up, you're flying a lot of empty seats. That's not good for business. It's no wonder that many American airlines prefer slightly smaller long-range aircraft like the Airbus A350-900 or Boeing 787 Dreamliner, which carry fewer people but still go the distance. Speaking of the Dreamliner, it's become a favorite for many U.S. carriers. Delta has ordered both the A350 and 787 in recent years. United has leaned heavily into the 787 fleet, using it on routes to Asia and Europe. American Airlines, meanwhile, has focused more on the 787-9 and 787-8 versions, which seat fewer people and work better on their mixed-route network. These choices all point to the same idea: flexibility over size. Things don't end there. Another reason for the U.S. airlines' disinterest in this plane is geography. The United States, as big as it is, doesn't sit in the middle of any major global transit path. If you look at a world map, you'll see that hubs like Doha, Dubai, and Istanbul are located in perfect positions to connect flights between Asia, Europe, and Africa. That's why airlines based there use giant planes like the A380 and plan to use the 777X, but the US is different. Most passengers flying to America are ending their journey there. The country doesn't act as a connecting point in the same way, so it doesn't need as many supersized jets. Another big factor is airport infrastructure and immigration rules. In the US, there is no such thing as sterile international transit. That means every passenger landing in the US, even if they're just switching planes, has to go through customs and immigration. This adds time, costs, and complications. In Europe or Asia, passengers can stay within international zones at airports, making quick transfers between long-haul flights. But in the US, this is simply not possible, so American airports don't function well as international transit hubs. This makes the idea of funneling thousands of people through one big aircraft less practical. Let's not forget that big delays also cost money. Airlines plan their fleets years in advance. If you were expecting a new aircraft in 2021, but now it's coming in 2026, that messes up your entire schedule. That's why some airlines like Emirates have demanded compensation from Boeing for the long wait. American carriers, already cautious, would rather wait things out than gamble on another uncertain aircraft timeline. In the meantime, Airbus has taken full advantage of this hesitation. Their A350-1000 offers similar performance to the 777X, but is already flying with many airlines. Delta, for instance, has ordered 20 A350-1000s, filling the same role the 777X might have played. The A350 is also available in different sizes, giving airlines more choices. This fleet flexibility has helped Airbus become more attractive to U.S. carriers, who don't want to commit to one giant airplane for limited use cases. That said, the story of the 777X in America isn't completely over. There's one place it still might shine: cargo. Stay tuned to see how exactly this will play out. The future of the Boeing 777X with U.S. Airlines. Right now, the most likely first American customers of the Boeing 777X are not the usual suspects like United, Delta, or American Airlines.
U.S. aircraft maker Boeing has officially announced the start of production for its new passenger plane, the 777X.
Instead, it's the cargo giants, being FedEx and UPS, that may end up flying the plane first. These companies move goods, not people, and they operate a very different kind of business. Unlike passenger airlines, which deal with busy seasons, off-peak months, booking apps, and passenger preferences, cargo airlines care mostly about one thing: efficiency. They want to fly as much cargo as possible, as far as possible, while spending the least money on fuel and maintenance. And on paper, the 777X is perfect for that. The freighter version of the 777X, also called the 777-8F, has already been generating attention. Boeing officially launched this version in January 2022, and it's expected to begin deliveries in the late 2027 to early 2028 range. While this model still needs to go through its own flight testing and certification process, it doesn't face the same level of scrutiny as the passenger version. That's partly because cargo aircraft don't carry people, and partly because Boeing can apply lessons from its earlier 777X testing to speed things up. It also helps that the original 777F, the freighter version of the previous 777, is already one of the most trusted cargo planes in the world. For companies like UPS and FedEx, a bigger, newer version with lower operating costs is an easy sell. FedEx especially could benefit. Their existing 777F fleet allows them to connect the US to faraway markets like China, India, and Europe. But as e-commerce keeps growing and global shipping demand rises, they'll need more capacity and better fuel savings. If the 777-8F delivers on its promise of 25% better fuel efficiency compared to older freighters, it would be a smart investment. UPS, with its large presence in Louisville, Kentucky, is also likely to take interest, especially as it expands services to Europe and Asia. Cargo may not be glamorous, but it's a quiet, consistent engine for the aviation world. And in that space, the 777X may find a strong and steady home before passengers ever step on board. Now, what about the passenger version? Will the 777X ever fly with American, United, or Delta? The short answer is yes, probably. But the long answer is not anytime soon. Let's take a look at each airline one by one. United Airlines is the most likely candidate to eventually adopt the 777X for passengers. Right now, United already operates a large fleet of 777-300ERs, which the 777X is meant to replace. Some of these planes are getting older and will need to be retired by the early 2030s. But United also has a massive fleet of 787 Dreamliners, which cover many of the same routes the 777X would fly. The big challenge for United is that they may not need a larger plane just yet. Their focus is on adding new international routes, yes, but many of those can be served with the 787-9 or 787-10. Still, as travel demand grows, especially between the US and Asia or the Middle East, United may eventually turn to the 777X. If it happens, it will likely be after 2028, once the aircraft is fully certified, tested, and proven in real-world use. American Airlines, on the other hand, has been more cautious. They already passed on the 777X once. Back in 2018, American Airlines chose not to buy the 77X or even the 787-10. Instead, they focused on the 787-9, which is smaller and better suited for their current long-haul routes. Like United, American has no real reason to jump into a larger plane right now. Many of their international flights are to Europe, South America, and some parts of Asia, which can be served by medium to large aircraft without the need for 400-seat giants. But by 2030, some of their older 777-2000s will be due for replacement. That might be the moment American reconsiders the 777X, especially if fuel prices rise or long-distance travel becomes more concentrated again. Then there's Delta Airlines, which has historically leaned toward Airbus. Delta has made big bets on the A350-900 and even ordered A350-1000s, a direct competitor to the 777X. Their decision likely shows two things. First, Delta prefers to operate aircraft that are already flying and proven. And second, Airbus offers a variety of plane sizes in the same family, giving Delta more flexibility in planning routes. While it's not impossible that Delta might one day consider the 777X, it's far less likely unless Airbus can't meet their needs in the future. For now, Delta seems happy with its current fleet mix and isn't likely to change direction. So what does this mean for the future? Well, if things go smoothly for Boeing from 2026 to 2028,
Boeing is the world's largest aerospace company, but there's yet another challenge: how to win back the trust of airline passengers.
If it's Boeing, I won't fly. Imagine paying thousands of dollars to fly, only to find out your plane is practically falling apart.
the Boeing 787 Dreamliner was supposed to be one of the safest and most advanced planes in the world. Built with strong but lightweight materials and designed to fly long distances with less fuel, the 787 quickly became the pride of many airlines. KLM, one of the oldest and most respected airlines in Europe, proudly added this aircraft to its fleet, trusting it with thousands of lives every day. But beneath the smooth design and modern features, something dangerous was quietly hiding. How did no one notice it until now? And what does this mean for the future of flying? Stick around, because this story will blow your mind. The routine check that changed everything. It all started during a routine maintenance check at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport. A KLM Boeing 787 Dreamliner had just returned from a long-haul flight, and as usual, the engineers began their post-flight inspection. This kind of check happens hundreds of times every week, often without any major findings. But that day was different. One of the engineers noticed something unusual near the wing root, which is the area where the wing meets the main body of the aircraft. At first, it looked like a hairline crack, barely visible to the naked eye. These aircraft are built with advanced materials like carbon fiber composites, and while those materials are strong, they also behave differently from the traditional aluminum used in older aircraft. What seemed like a minor line couldn't be ignored. Following protocol, the team ran a series of deeper scans using ultrasonic and thermographic testing. What they found made them pause. The crack wasn't just on the surface, it ran deeper, right into one of the internal structural joints. This wasn't just cosmetic damage. It was a sign of possible failure in one of the most critical parts of the aircraft.
There's a secondary problem where maintenance of the aircraft can be an issue. So the design might be fine, but there aren't enough checks going on. The aircraft aren't being maintained properly, and so that metastasizes the issue further.
Word spread quickly inside the hangar. The lead engineer called in specialists. More scans were taken, and over the next few hours, it became clear that this was not an isolated issue caused by some rough landing or weather stress. This was something that had been forming slowly over time. It was hidden, buried beneath layers of composite material and routine inspections. By the next morning, the aircraft was grounded. Not for a day or two, but indefinitely. KLM sent a full report to Boeing. Engineers from the aircraft manufacturer arrived within hours. They brought their own tools and their own concerns. The conversation between KLM and Boeing wasn't just about that single plane. It was about every other Dreamliner in the KLM fleet. If one aircraft showed signs of this deep fault, could others have the same issue? And worse, could planes in other parts of the world be flying right now with the same weakness buried inside them? The stakes were high. The Dreamliner had a clean safety record. It was trusted by major airlines all over the world. But if this crack, this hidden fault, was the result of a design issue or a manufacturing flaw, it could turn into a global crisis. No one wanted to jump to conclusions, but one thing was clear. Something serious had been found. And the deeper the investigation went, the more worrying the picture became.
Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun is meeting with senators on Capitol Hill today as the company's airplanes are coming under increased scrutiny following a string of troubling incidents.
When Boeing designed the 787 Dreamliner, it was a massive leap forward in aviation. The aircraft used fewer metal parts, had a lighter frame, and promised better fuel efficiency. But its most talked about feature was its use of composite materials that were strong, flexible, and resistant to corrosion. These materials were supposed to be the future, and for a long time they were. But that promise came with a hidden cost. The crack found on the KLM Dreamliner wasn't just sitting on a metal joint. It was hidden inside one of these advanced composite layers. In traditional aircraft, cracks often appear on the surface and can be seen, measured, and repaired. But with composite structures, the damage can begin from the inside. It can grow silently, even while the plane is in service, and remain invisible until it's too late. The engineers discovered that the internal frame near the wing joint had started to delaminate. That means the layers of composite material, which are glued together under high pressure, were beginning to separate. Think of it like layers of plywood coming apart. On a bench, that's a small problem, but inside a plane moving at hundreds of miles per hour, carrying over 200 people, it's a disaster waiting to happen. To make matters worse, this area of the aircraft wasn't supposed to experience the kind of stress that would cause such damage. That made the engineers nervous. Boeing's team joined KLM's inspection, and soon, both groups realized something chilling. The crack was forming in a part of the plane that wasn't supposed to crack ever. This wasn't the result of an accident. It was something that had likely been growing flight after flight, unnoticed. Engineers dug into flight logs. They checked weather patterns, landing conditions, and pressure readings. Nothing stood out. The Dreamliner had flown normally, landed smoothly, and passed every routine check. Still, the damage was there, hidden beneath the skin of the aircraft, inching forward day by day, completely invisible during standard inspections. This led to one big question. If this damage was developing under normal flying conditions, how many other Dreamliners could be hiding the same threat? Within days, KLM grounded multiple 787's in their fleet. Not because they had all shown signs of damage, but because no one could be sure. Pressure. Behind the scenes. Boeing asked other airlines to start internal inspections. Qatar Airways, American Airlines, British Airways, and several others began checking their own Dreamliners, especially the ones that had been in service the longest. Some airlines reported similar findings. Not identical cracks, but tiny signs of stress in the same region. That was enough to sound the alarm. A quiet investigation turned into a global concern. The aviation world was holding its breath. The Dreamliner had flown for years without a single major accident linked to structural failure. But now, that record felt like a ticking clock. Behind closed doors, meetings were held between airline CEOs, safety regulators, and Boeing executives. Everyone wanted answers. But there was another concern, one that few wanted to say out loud. If this fault had gone unnoticed for this long, what else might be hiding inside the world's most trusted aircraft? As the engineers worked, pressure grew quietly behind the scenes.
Other airlines using MAX 9 jets, including United, also reported finding loose bolts. United says it's now rethinking their partnership with Boeing.
Airlines don't just ground planes without a cost. Every parked aircraft means canceled flights, delayed schedules, and angry passengers. For an international airline like KLM, where the Dreamliner forms the backbone of many long-haul routes, even one aircraft sitting idle was a financial hit. Now, they had several, but safety always comes first. Or at least, it should. Boeing knew what was at stake.
Our top engineers and technical experts have been working tirelessly in collaboration with the Federal Aviation Administration and our customers to finalize and implement a software update that will ensure accidents like these never happen again.
They had already survived a major crisis a few years earlier with the 737 MAX. That aircraft had been grounded globally after 2 crashes revealed flaws in the automated flight control system. It had taken years, billions of dollars, and a damaged reputation to recover from that blow. A second major issue, this time with the 787, could be devastating. Inside Boeing, teams of engineers, lawyers, and executives scrambled to understand the scale of the problem. They were contemplating if this were a manufacturing defect, design oversight, or it be traced back to how certain aircraft were maintained. Initial reports suggested that the delamination might have begun near one of the fastening points that connect the wing structure to the fuselage. These points carry massive loads during flight, especially during takeoff and landing. Over time, tiny shifts, just millimeters, can add stress. And if the materials used during assembly were even slightly misaligned or imperfect, the damage could build slowly, flight after flight. That's when questions started falling on the supply chain. Boeing doesn't build every part of the plane themselves. Like most modern aircraft, the Dreamliner is assembled from components made by dozens of companies across multiple countries. One supplier builds the fuselage sections. Another makes the wings. Others provide bolts, fasteners, and sensors. The parts come together like a puzzle, often in separate facilities, before final assembly happens in the United States. It didn't take long before attention turned to suppliers responsible for providing critical structural components. Investigators began reviewing their quality control logs. There were whispers, not confirmed yet, that one batch of materials may have fallen just short of ideal standards. Not bad enough to raise alarms during inspection, but just enough to weaken under stress over time. Boeing didn't comment publicly on the supplier, but insiders knew the company was under scrutiny. Meanwhile, national aviation authorities started getting involved. The Dutch Safety Board worked closely with KLM, while the European Union Aviation Safety Agency sent teams to observe the findings. In the United States, the Federal Aviation Administration opened a review, and in Asia, countries like Japan and Singapore began quietly examining their own Dreamliners, just in case. This was no longer about one plane or one airline. It was about a potential pattern, a structural issue that could stretch across hundreds of aircraft flying today. And yet, Boeing remained cautious. Public statements were short, carefully worded, and filled with phrases like ongoing review and commitment to safety. But internally, the urgency was clear. If even one aircraft experienced failure during flight, the consequences would be tragic, and global trust in the Dreamliner would shatter. Some experts began speaking out. A few former Boeing engineers told aviation blogs that concerns about composite materials had been raised years ago, especially regarding long-term fatigue. They weren't blaming anyone directly, but they were raising flags. As one retired mechanic put it simply, when you build something to last, you have to make sure it actually will. Cracks in confidence. As investigations deepened, the problem was no longer just technical, but emotional. People were starting to pay attention. News outlets picked up the story, first in the Netherlands, then across Europe, and eventually worldwide. Headlines read, "The Boeing 787 Dreamliner's long history of safety concerns," and "Boeing grounds 8 Dreamliners over fuselage flaws." Passengers began asking questions. Flight attendants noticed the shift immediately. People boarding 787's looked uneasy. Some were hesitant to fasten their seatbelts. Others asked if they were flying on one of the broken planes. The calm confidence that had always surrounded the Dreamliner had been shaken. KLM responded quickly, releasing a public statement that reassured passengers their aircraft were being checked thoroughly and that any jet with even the slightest concern would not fly. Still, not everyone was convinced. Bookings dropped slightly. A few customers even switched to different airlines just to avoid flying on a 787. Other airlines felt the tremor too. British Airways, Qatar Airways, and United Airlines, all major operators of the Dreamliner, began issuing updates about their inspection schedules. Even when no issues were found, they still had to explain their actions. This was about trust, and trust is fragile. At the heart of it all, Boeing faced a dilemma. On one hand, they didn't want to create panic. On the other hand, staying silent could be seen as hiding something. So, they tried to walk a tightrope, cooperating with regulators, supporting the airlines, but avoiding too much detail in public. But details eventually began to leak. An aviation analyst revealed that the specific area where the fault was discovered between the mid-fuselage and wing join had been flagged before during production delays years ago. Back then, it wasn't seen as dangerous, just complex. But now, with evidence of delamination, everything from that earlier warning took on new meaning. To make matters worse, engineers from 2 airlines reported tiny gaps called shimming issues in other 787's. Shims are small fillers used to close spaces between parts during assembly. If placed incorrectly or if they shift over time, they can cause stress points. Boeing had known about shimming problems in the past, even pausing production for months to fix them. But no one thought those minor adjustments could lead to something as serious as this. By now, the investigation was growing in 2 directions. One group focused on materials like the composites, adhesives, and layering methods used during assembly. The second looked at load stress, like how everyday flying puts pressure on joints, especially after hundreds or thousands of takeoffs and landings. The conclusion was not yet clear, but one thing stood out. This was not a one-time error. It wasn't caused by one technician or one bad flight. It was something that had quietly built up over years of normal service. Inside Boeing, some voices began pushing for a full fleet inspection order, not just for KLM planes, but for every 787 flying anywhere in the world. Others hesitated. Such a move would disrupt global travel. It would cost airlines millions. It could damage relationships. Meanwhile, pilots kept flying, cabin crews kept serving, mechanics kept checking. But underneath it all, people were watching closely. And not just in the industry, because passengers were paying attention. Travel bloggers started warning readers. Online forums buzzed with questions. Families about to fly to see loved ones began to second-guess their tickets. The Dreamliner, once seen as a wonder of modern travel, was now under a shadow. The fault inside one aircraft had exposed more than just a crack in the frame. It had exposed a crack in the confidence of millions. The race to fix the fault. With the fault now public, the pressure was on to act fast. Aviation regulators around the world moved quickly. In Europe, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency issued emergency directives, ordering immediate inspections of all Boeing 787 Dreamliners. The Federal Aviation Administration in the United States followed suit. KLM and other airlines scrambled to comply, pulling dozens of planes out of service to undergo thorough examinations. For Boeing, this was a crisis unlike any they had faced in recent years. Engineers worked day and night, examining every detail of the fault. They tested samples in labs, used computer simulations, and reviewed every manufacturing record. They needed to know what had caused this fault to form, and more importantly, how could they stop it from happening again? Early results pointed toward a combination of factors. The materials themselves were strong, but required precise handling. Even tiny errors during assembly, like improperly placed adhesives or small shifts in layers, could weaken the structure. Over time, the constant stress of flights like takeoffs, landings, turbulence would worsen these hidden weaknesses until they became visible cracks. Boeing's design teams began working on a fix. That's not all. Unlike a simple replacement of parts, this problem meant changing how the planes were built and maintained. They had to redesign some internal joints, improve quality controls at suppliers, and develop new inspection techniques that could detect damage before it became dangerous. Meanwhile, airlines had to cope with grounded fleets and disrupted schedules. For KLM, this meant canceling or delaying dozens of long-haul flights. Passengers were rebooked, compensation paid, and crews reassigned. The financial toll was heavy, but safety came first. Public relations teams also went into overdrive. Boeing and KLM issued regular updates, trying to reassure the public that every step was being taken to keep passengers safe. Still, the damage to confidence was clear. Some travelers chose other airlines, while others postponed trips altogether. The aviation industry learned a harsh lesson. Even the most advanced technology can hide unexpected dangers. The Dreamliners Fault was a reminder that innovation always carries risks, but it also showed how quickly the system could respond as engineers, regulators, airlines, and manufacturers worked together to find solutions. Inside hangars around the world, mechanics developed new skills and tools. They learned to spot subtle signs that had once gone unnoticed. Pilots received updated training to handle emergencies related to structural issues, and engineers studied every flight, every landing, looking for clues that might prevent the next hidden fault. The race was on to fix the planes already in the air and to make sure future models were safer than ever. As the news spread, passengers began to worry. Flying on a Boeing 787 felt uncertain. Social media filled with anxious questions, videos explaining the fault went viral, and forums buzzed with debates. Some travelers shared stories of canceled flights or changed bookings, while others openly admitted they felt uneasy stepping onto a Dreamliner. Flight attendants and pilots faced the challenge of calming nerves in the cabin. They knew the planes were being checked thoroughly, but they also understood how fear could spread quickly. Training sessions now included how to talk to concerned passengers without causing panic. Airlines worked hard to reassure everyone, emphasizing that the planes were grounded as a safety precaution, not because they were unsafe to fly. Meanwhile, the fault discovery sparked debates in aviation circles worldwide. Industry experts questioned whether the push for lighter, more fuel-efficient planes had come at a cost. The Dreamliner's innovative materials were supposed to be a breakthrough, but they also required new ways of maintenance and inspection, which were knowledge that the entire global industry was still catching up to. Some critics argued that regulators had been too slow to act. They wondered if more aggressive inspections should have been in place years ago. Others pointed to the challenges of managing a vast international supply chain, where thousands of parts are sourced from different companies around the world. Ensuring consistent quality across all these suppliers was a huge task, and even small mistakes could create risks. In the end, the incident showed that even the most advanced machines depend on careful attention, constant vigilance, and above all, the people who build, maintain, and fly them. The skies may be filled with technology, but it is human care and expertise that keep them safe. What would you do if you found out your plane had a hidden fault? Would you still feel safe flying on a Dreamliner? Let us know in the comments section. Remember to like, share it, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.